On October 14, 2004, at 8:17 a.m., federal agents walked through the iron gates of Ridgeview Estate. The property sat on the outskirts of Asheville, North Carolina. They were there for a financial fraud search, not a murder case. Inside the three-story house, they cataloged paintings, safes, and files, following a strict inventory log. Then an agent pushed on a bookshelf and felt it move. Behind it, a narrow stairway led down to a sealed underground room. What happened here, and how could it connect to Emily Carter, who vanished on September 3, 1990, at 7:25 a.m.? 14 years later, investigators were about to touch the first solid trace of her life. One object in that cellar would change everything. The hidden stairs opened into a low stone chamber that looked more like a holding cell than a wine room. Forensic lights cut through the dust, revealing racks of old bottles. Near them stood a heavy wooden frame with a pointed seat and thick ropes hanging from the ceiling. Agents noted it as a historical torture device and tagged it. Then they saw the bicycle on the wall. It was white, coated in dust, mounted high like a display. One agent wiped the metal plate on the frame and read out the serial number. Another wrote it down and flagged it for a database check before they moved on. While that number traveled through servers and old case files, Nathan Carter was hanging from a harness under another dome across town. It was still October 14, 2004, but now it was late morning inside the Blue Ridge County Courthouse. At 29, Nathan worked as a restoration contractor, cleaning and repainting the courthouse ceiling one square at a time. He liked the control, the quiet, the way old paint could be brought back to a clean line. That silence broke when his supervisor stepped out onto the floor below and shouted up that his mother was on the phone. She never called him at work. Not since the week his younger sister, 21-year-old Emily, never came home. Nathan unclipped, lowered himself to the marble, and walked toward the temporary office. He did not know that a code from that cellar was about to drag his family back into the spotlight. Nathan reached the plywood office at 11:06 a.m. His supervisor handed him the landline and stepped back. On the other end, his mother's voice shook in a way he had not heard since 1990. She said a detective from the state police had called. A bicycle frame number from an old missing person file had just matched an item in a federal raid near Asheville. The file was Emily's. To understand what that meant, you have to know who Emily Carter was in 1990. She was 21. She split her week between a community college campus in Asheville and a small used bookstore downtown. She kept her schedule in a paper planner written in small, neat lines. Family, work, classes, and one standing note every Thursday night for a local history seminar. Emily grew up in a one-story house on the edge of the city. Her parents, Mark and Linda, worked regular jobs and kept to a routine. Emily did not. She argued about curfews, politics, and what she called empty rules. She asked hard questions at school board meetings and in church study groups. That habit of speaking up made teachers notice her. It also made some adults uneasy. Nathan was 8 years older. By 1990, he had already moved out once, then come back after Emily vanished. Before that, he saw her as the kid sister who borrowed his car and his tapes. After September 3, 1990, she became a fixed date in every conversation, a gap they circled but could not cross. For 14 years, the Carters lived with numbers instead of answers. Date of disappearance. Case number. Height. Weight. Last clothing description. The official record called it a missing adult investigation with no confirmed crime scene. No body. No suspect. No trial. At family gatherings, one chair stayed empty by habit, not by choice. Cases like this are why many viewers follow long cold case stories. If you want to stay with this one through every development, make sure you are subscribed so you do not miss what comes next. On October 14, 2004, as Nathan drove back to his parents' driveway, he had already decided one thing. If this new lead was real, he would push it farther than the system had ever been willing to go. On September 3, 1990, Emily Carter left her parents' driveway at 7:18 a.m. on her white road bike. She wore a gray college sweatshirt, dark jeans, and running shoes, with a blue backpack strapped tight across her shoulders. The route from the house to campus was routine, a little over 5 miles along a 2-lane county road. She had ridden it dozens of times. That morning, she never arrived at her first class. The timeline that day is built from small, fixed points. At 7:19 a.m., a neighbor watering his lawn saw Emily pass the corner stop sign and wave. At 7:26 a.m., a school bus driver reported seeing a cyclist matching her description near a stretch of wooded shoulder along County Road 14. After that sighting, there are no confirmed witnesses. Emily's professor marked her absent at 8:05 a.m. When she did not show up for her afternoon shift at the bookstore, her manager called the house. Her parents reported her missing to Asheville police at 6:41 p.m. Patrol units checked the direct route first, then fanned out. A deputy located faint tire tracks cutting off the pavement near a shallow drainage ditch, about 3 miles from the Carter home. There was no blood, no clothing, no broken gear, and no sign of a crashed vehicle. The tracks could have been from any bike, or they could have been from the last time Emily's tires touched asphalt. Search teams worked into the night and through the next 2 days. Volunteers, dogs, and a state helicopter covered fields, creek beds, and abandoned farm buildings. No wallet, no bike, no body. By the end of the week, detectives faced 3 basic theories: a stranger abduction, a voluntary disappearance, or an accident followed by concealment. What happened next shaped the next 14 years. Without a crime scene, the case stayed coded as a missing adult investigation. Leads slowed. Tips dried up. The folder moved from an active desk to a cold case cabinet. Inside, a yellow form listed every piece of property tied to Emily that police could confirm. Her bank card, her work keys, her license plate. At the bottom, one note stayed unresolved. White bicycle, serial number recorded, not recovered. No one in 1990 guessed that missing bike would return. Nathan left the courthouse within minutes of hanging up. It was still October 14, 2004, a little after 11 a.m., when he pulled his pickup onto I-240 toward his parents' neighborhood in East Asheville. For 14 years, the Carter family had learned to live without answers. One phone call from his mother had torn that routine open again. He reached the small brick house before noon. Inside, the living room looked almost unchanged from 1990. Same couch, same framed photos on the wall. Only his parents had aged. His father, Robert, now 60, sat hunched in an armchair, prescription bottles lined on the side table. His mother, Linda, clutched a worn manila folder so tight her fingers shook. They called from the sheriff's office, she said. Cold case. They said they needed a serial number from the old report. Nathan knew the folder at a glance. It held a copy of the file and old flyers. Linda opened it and pulled out a single sheet dated September 4, 1990. In the property section, a clerk had listed a white 10-speed bicycle and its serial number. She slid the page toward him. I can't read it without my glasses. You do it. Nathan read the letters and digits twice. Then once more, steady and slow. Linda dialed the number written on a notepad and handed him the phone. A male voice answered on the second ring, identified himself as Detective Ryan Holt with the Buncombe County Sheriff's Office Cold Case Unit, and asked Nathan to repeat the serial. Holt went quiet for a few seconds. That matches what we have, he said. The bike with this number was logged this morning during a federal search at a property called Ridgeview Estate in North Asheville. It appears to be intact. We need one of you to come in, review the file, and meet us at the scene tomorrow. Robert stared at the muted television. We can't do this again, he said. In 1995, a promising tip from a Tennessee bus station had fallen apart in 2 days and left them worse than before. I'll go, Nathan said. I'll talk to them. You don't have to face the cameras. Holt set the meeting for 8:30 a.m. at the sheriff's office and a 9:30 follow-up at Ridgeview. When Nathan hung up, the house felt smaller, and the first lead in Emily's case pointed straight at a locked estate. Nathan arrived at the Buncombe County Sheriff's Office at 8:27 a.m. on October 15, 2004. Detective Ryan Holt met him in the lobby, holding a thin, worn case folder. They went straight to a small interview room. Holt laid out the original missing person report, a fresh property sheet from the federal raid, and 2 photographs. The first photo showed a narrow stone room with wine racks and a heavy wooden frame in the center. The second showed a dusty white bicycle mounted high on the wall. The image was grainy but clear enough for Nathan to recognize the style. Holt pointed to a close-up shot of the frame. The serial number plate matched the one on the 1990 form. There was no doubt. Holt explained what agents had found. Ridgeview Estate belonged to a finance executive named Oliver Dane. under federal investigation for wire fraud and tax evasion. The raid was run by an FBI financial crime squad. Their focus was bank servers, contracts, and luxury assets, not a 14-year-old missing person case. The cellar was discovered only because an agent leaned on a bookshelf in the library and felt it shift. Behind that shelf, a narrow stairwell led to the underground room. On paper, Ridgeview had a basement for storage, but no mention of a separate stone chamber. County building records did not show that space. It was not on any approved plan. That was the first gap. The second was the device. In the center of the room stood a triangular wooden structure with a pointed seat and old ropes hanging above it. An agent with a history background had flagged it as a reproduction of a European torture device. The FBI inventory listed it as antique disciplinary apparatus, possible replica. No one at the scene could explain why it sat in a locked room on a modern estate. The third gap was forensic. The stone walls and racks were coated in thick dust. No fresh footprints. No obvious blood. The first sweep came back with no usable DNA. Technically, there was still no proof Emily had ever been inside that cellar. Only the bike tied the room to her name. Holt closed the folder and looked at Nathan. The next step would turn those gaps into either a dead end or a new crime scene. Nathan followed Detective Holt's unmarked sedan through the gates of Ridgeview at 9:29 a.m. The main house looked like any other high-end property in western North Carolina. Fresh paint, trimmed lawn, 2 stone lions on either side of the front steps. Nothing about the exterior hinted at a link to a missing 21-year-old college student. Inside, the difference between the fraud case and Emily's case was obvious. FBI agents worked in the front rooms, boxing up hard drives and files. In the back hallway, 2 county deputies waited by a closed library door with evidence tape across the frame. Holt signed them in and led Nathan inside. The library was lined with shelves and a single leather chair. In one corner, a tall bookcase stood slightly away from the wall. Holt pushed on a low shelf. The entire unit pivoted, revealing a narrow entry framed in raw wood. Cool air and the smell of damp stone came up from below. They descended a short flight of concrete steps. The cellar ceiling was low. Stone walls, no windows, one heavy door at the far end. Forensic lights on tripods washed the room in a flat white glare. On 3 sides, metal racks held wine bottles layered in dust. The floor was bare concrete except for a dark mat under the wooden frame. Nathan saw the structure in the center and stopped. It was built from thick beams, with a sharply angled seat and worn leather straps. Chains and a pulley hung above it. He did not need a label to understand it was not furniture. Holt spoke carefully, almost clinical. An expert had described it as a replica of a historic punishment device, likely custom-built. It showed were consistent with use, but no visible blood. Then Holt raised his light toward the far wall. The white bicycle hung there, high above eye level, bolted through the frame into the stone. Dust coated the handlebars and spokes. The tires were cracked, but still held their shape. A property tag with the Ridgeview case number now dangled from the front wheel. Nathan stepped closer until he could see a faint scratch on the top tube. Emily had once dropped the bike in the driveway. He had teased her about it for weeks. That scratch was still there. The room offered no body and no clear cause of death, but it placed Emily's world inside Oliver Dane's secret space. Detective Ryan Holt's next move was simple on paper. The 1990 file listed Emily's closest contact as a classmate and co-worker, Sarah Mitchell. On October 18, 2004, Holt asked Nathan to sit in on a new interview. They met Sarah at a quiet table in a coffee shop near downtown Asheville. She was now in her mid-30s, married, working in healthcare, and still carried a worn student ID with Emily's picture tucked behind her driver's license. Holt started with basic questions. How often did she see Emily in 1990? What classes they shared? Whether Emily had talked about anyone new. Sarah described Emily almost the same way Nathan remembered her. Smart, direct, unimpressed by titles. She said Emily was the only student in their local history seminar who challenged guest speakers instead of taking notes. Then Holt asked if anything unusual had happened in the weeks before September 3, 1990. Sarah hesitated. She looked at Nathan, then back at Holt, and said there had been one incident she had never put in a formal statement. 2 weeks before Emily disappeared, a guest lecturer visited their evening seminar at Asheville Community College. He was introduced as Dr. Leonard Graves, a visiting historian from a private institute that focused on early American discipline traditions. He wore a gray suit, carried a leather folder, and spoke in a slow, measured tone. According to Sarah, the lecture shifted from history to judgment. Graves praised old public punishments, called modern courts weak, and said young adults lacked moral correction. Emily raised her hand and did not put it down. She cited court cases, questioned his sources, and accused him of excusing abuse. The room went quiet. Sarah remembered one exact line. After class, Graves approached Emily by the door and said, "People like you have to be corrected before you infect others." His voice was calm. His eyes never left her face. Sarah never told police that detail in 1990. She said she thought it was just an argument. She moved away the next year and assumed it did not matter. When Holt asked if she could identify Graves from a photo lineup, she did not hesitate. Detective Ryan Holt left the interview with Sarah Mitchell with more than a new name. He now had a clear phrase. "People like you have to be corrected." When he wrote it in his notes, it matched the one word that had bothered him since he first saw the Ridgeview cellar inventory. Correction. He pulled Emily's old case file and compared it with the Ridgeview reports. On one side, he had a 21-year-old student who challenged authority, favored debates, and disappeared on a short bike ride in 1990. On the other side, he had a hidden chamber under a rich man's estate, a punishment device, and her white bike bolted to the wall. The parts fit emotionally, but not yet legally. The first conflict came from the FBI. Their fraud squad treated the cellar as an odd side room, not the main event. To them, Oliver Dane was a financial suspect, not a violent offender. They reminded Holt that the federal warrant covered accounts and records, not a homicide search. Any expansion would need new paperwork and more time. The second conflict came from the lab. The initial sweep of the cellar surfaces showed no usable DNA, no blood, and almost no hair. Dust layers suggested years of disuse. The wooden device showed pressure marks and minor wear, but no obvious trace material. On paper, you could argue that no one had used that room in a long time. Holt pushed against both walls by shifting his focus to Ridgeview's past. County property records showed that Dane had purchased the estate in 1996. From 1984 to 1995, however, Ridgeview was not owned by a private resident. It belonged to a group called the Blue Ridge Colonial Fellowship, registered as a nonprofit focused on living history and traditional discipline. Emily disappeared in 1990, right in the middle of that period. Holt ran the fellowship's board list through driver's license photos and academic staff directories. One name at the center stood out. Dr. Leonard Graves sat on the board for 7 years and helped oversee behavioral demonstrations. The man who told Emily she needed to be corrected had a direct tie to the hidden estate. What Holt still did not know was who stood above Graves and used that cellar as their private classroom. Detective Ryan Holt could not move fast enough through normal channels, so Nathan started his own parallel search. On October 20th, 2004, he signed in at the Buncombe County Register of Deeds and asked for the full file on the Blue Ridge Colonial Fellowship. The clerk pulled old incorporation papers, tax filings, and a stack of event permits from 1984 through 1993. The language was careful, almost sanitized. Public documents described weekend discipline demonstrations, historical correction displays, and didactic exercises in early American order. Locations listed included Ridgeview Estate and a rented barn outside Weaverville. None of those words appeared in Emily's 1990 case file. No one had ever linked the fellowship's schedule to the night she vanished. Nathan highlighted 3 dates. 2 were weekends with large public events. The third stood out. Monday, September 3rd, 1990. The fellowship had filed a limited use permit for closed instructional exercises, not open to public viewing, at Ridgeview. Emily disappeared on that date between 6:40 and 7:10 p.m. Holt sent that permit to the FBI. It was the first official document tying the fellowship's private events to the exact day of the disappearance. It still did not prove Emily entered the cellar, but it placed a secret meeting on the property at the same time her bike vanished. Next, Holt contacted the North Carolina Historical Society. An archivist there, Dr. Melissa Crane, remembered Blue Ridge Colonial Fellowship for another reason. In 1992, an anonymous donor had mailed in a set of privately printed newsletters and pamphlets from the group with a short note. "These people are not what they claim," the note read. The sender never identified themselves. Holt and Nathan reviewed the newsletters in a quiet reading room on October 22nd. Articles under Dr. Leonard Graves' name praised firm physical correction. Another contributor argued that young adults who openly defy rightful authority must be brought low for the good of the community. One masthead listed the fellowship's board of directors. Graves was there, in print, as chief historian. Above him, in bold type, was the chair's name. It belonged to a sitting Superior Court judge in Western North Carolina. Nathan realized the person who signed warrants in that courthouse might also have signed off on what happened under Ridgeview. Naming the judge changed the stakes overnight. On October 24, 2004, Detective Ryan Holt typed it into his report for the first time. Judge Alan Mercer, chair of the Blue Ridge Colonial Fellowship Board. For 20 years, Mercer had signed warrants, set bonds, and lectured juries on duty from a bench in Asheville. Now his name sat above Leonard Graves in a newsletter that praised firm physical correction for defiant young adults. Holt knew local channels were compromised. He carried the file to the North Carolina Attorney General's office in Raleigh. Conflict of interest was obvious. A sitting Superior Court judge could not also be the quiet suspect in a cold case. A small public corruption unit agreed to review the material. They saw enough smoke to open a joint task force, but warned Holt they still lacked a body, a confession, or a direct physical link between Emily and any member of the fellowship. Nathan refused to wait. He went back to the board list and circled a name near the bottom. Daniel Price, junior member, treasurer from 1990 to 1992, now a mid-level accountant in Hendersonville with a recent bankruptcy. On October 26th, Nathan met him in a strip mall parking lot after work. At first, Price denied everything. When Nathan showed him a photocopy of the Ridgeview cellar and the mounted bike, his face drained of color. He said the group had a second name in private, the Appalachian Correction Circle. They had used Ridgeview for sessions with adults who challenged them in classes and community meetings. He claimed he never touched anyone but sat in the room during planning. Price also gave them something new. The circle documented every session on videotape for accountability and stored written logs. When the group shut down in 1995, those archives moved off the estate to a building in an industrial part of Asheville. The storage company paperwork, Price said, was in the name of a shell corporation controlled by Mercer. Holt brought Price to Raleigh. Under oath, with counsel present, Price repeated his statement. That was enough for an emergency search warrant for a warehouse listed to Blue Ridge Heritage Holdings, LLC. On October 29, 2004, Holt, Nathan, and a small task force found the warehouse. Mercer and Graves' cars were already parked outside, and a thin line of smoke was slipping from a roof vent. Nathan watched the smoke thicken and understood they were not just late. They were watching the proof about to burn. The task force did not have time for a long standoff. On October 29, 2004, at 8:12 p.m., officers from the Attorney General's Public Corruption Unit and Buncombe County deputies moved on the warehouse listed to Blue Ridge Heritage Holdings. Fire units staged a block away, waiting for the all-clear. Holt watched the thin stream of smoke from the roof vent grow into a steady flow. Every minute meant more paper and tape turning into ash. A breaching team hit the side door. Inside, they found a crude burn setup in the center of the main bay. Industrial drums had been converted into makeshift incinerators. Flames reached several feet high. Cardboard file boxes were stacked nearby. Many were already empty, their contents feeding the fire. Others were still sealed. Judge Alan Mercer stood next to the drums in a gray sweatshirt and jeans, holding heavy gloves. Leonard Graves was beside him with a box cutter in hand. Both men were ordered to the ground and cuffed without a fight. Mercer tried to state his office, as if that still held weight in the smoky air. An agent read him his rights over the roar of the fire. Fire crews pushed in and knocked the flames down within minutes. The air filled with wet ash and the smell of burned plastic. Forensic techs dragged out any box that still had weight. In the back of the bay, behind old display cases, they found a row of metal cabinets that had not been touched yet. Inside were binders, labeled by year, and shelves of VHS tapes with dates and initials scrawled on the edges. One tape, pulled at random from 1990, was marked EW, Instruction. A second used Emily's full last name. The team sealed everything and logged it on scene. Mercer and Graves were booked that night on obstruction and evidence tampering, while prosecutors prepared more serious charges. By January 2005, a statewide grand jury in Raleigh indicted both men for kidnapping, murder, conspiracy, and racketeering tied to correction sessions involving multiple adults. Daniel Price was listed as a cooperating witness. Nathan knew the charges were historic, but the real test would be what happened when 12 strangers watched those tapes in open court. The trial of Judge Alan Mercer and Leonard Graves opened in Asheville on March 6, 2006. Jury selection took a full week. Every potential juror was asked if they had watched the coverage of the warehouse raid or read about correction sessions in the paper. Many were dismissed. In the end, 12 people agreed to sit through weeks of tapes, ledgers, and survivor testimony. Prosecutors started with the paper trail. They walked the jury through the clinic logs, the bank transfers, and the fuel records tying Mercer's vehicles to the Blue Ridge cabin on nights when people went missing. Then they brought in the FBI techs who had restored the VHS tapes. Still frames showed Emily Walker entering the cabin and never leaving. No violence was shown in court, only the start of each session and the time-coded gaps that followed. When Daniel Price took the stand, the room stayed silent. He described how sessions were scheduled, who held keys, and how Mercer spoke about retraining adults who challenged him. He admitted he had participated, signed his own plea deal, and said he came forward because the tapes showed more than he had ever agreed to. Defense attorneys attacked his credibility, pointed to his reduced sentence, and suggested he was inventing details to save himself. After 4 weeks of testimony, the jury deliberated for 3 days. On April 11, 2006, they found Mercer and Graves guilty of kidnapping and murder in Emily's case, along with multiple counts tied to other adults. Both men received life sentences without parole. Daniel was later given a 12-year sentence on lesser charges, with credit for cooperation. Outside the courthouse, some families called the verdict only half justice. The tapes and ledgers showed other initials and silhouettes no one could match to a name. Civil suits followed against the clinic, the non-profit shell companies, and Mercer's estate. Some settled quietly. Others dragged on for years. By 2012, a probate court formally declared Emily Walker dead, allowing her parents to place a headstone in a small cemetery outside Asheville, even though her body was never found. To this day, one set of initials in Mercer's ledger has never been publicly explained.